Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I am now joined by one of my favorite NFL writers, authors, journalists. He's a man of many hats. It's Gary Myers, Once a Giant author. Go pick up Once a Giant. Go pick up Brady versus Manning. You'll be smarter. You'll be glad you did, because Gary is great and has been great at what he has done for a long time. Not to date you a little bit, Gary, but I've been reading you for a long time, and very excited to read Once a Giant. How are you, sir?
Don't tell me you're another one that was I've been reading it since I'm a kid.
I mean, I'm 32, Gary, and
you have been reading me since you're a kid.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah, I think that checks out, sir. That's okay. That means you've been writing a long time, and that's the goal, right? To write a long time.
If I entertained and educated you along the way, all the better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, before we even get into some NFL Super Bowl stuff and things like that, what can you shed light on with Once a Giant, and what made you want to write this book, and kind of the lead up to it, conversations, why you think Giants fans will really find this book interesting. What can you tell us about it so far?
Yeah, Chase, it's not only Giant fans. I think it's football fans, or just people in general, because the book is just chock full of human interest stories. And I was motivated to write a book about life after football. I think that's such an important issue. And, I was trying to think that I want to write about, I wanted to write about players from the generation of the Giants' 86 Super Bowl team, late 80s, mid to late 80s, early 90s. And I was trying to decide whether to just pick players around the league from that era and write about them, trying to find the best stories I could, or to write about a team. And I thought just approaching it, writing about one team was the best way to do it, because then the stories would connect. And the 86 Giants, by far the most beloved and popular of the Giants' 4 Super Bowl teams. That was probably, in my opinion, one of the 5 best teams of the Super Bowl era. And, just really filled with big names: Parcells and Belichick, Sims, Taylor, Banks, Carson, Jim Burt, etc. So, and I already knew a lot of these players. So I was able to reconnect with them, and the stories about their life after football, many heartbreaking stories about some of the challenges that they're facing and trying to overcome. But then also a lot of heartwarming stories about how these guys formed a brotherhood in 1986, as most championship teams do. But what's unusual about this team is that the bond is still remains strong, 37 years later, and they're there to help each other when they realize one of their teammates, need people to rally around them. So I didn't want to write 300 pages of heartbreaking stories, and I easily could have. So I balanced it off with what a cool team this, and how they really still care for each other.
I love that. Go get ready for that, NFL fans. And again, you don't have to be just a Giants fan to enjoy Once a Giant. And again, go pick up Brady versus Manning, the catch. There's just all kinds of great stuff. And I'm going to push you to get this Falcons in there. We've seen a lot of Giants behind you, seen a lot of 49ers. I need a Falcons book. If you had to do a Falcons book right now, what would it be? What story would it be? The 28-3 comeback? Would it be, I don't know, what could it be for you if you had to think about it? Well, on the spot here, Gary.
Well, I think I would write about how disaster strikes the Falcons when they get into the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Whether it was the night before their first Super Bowl with Eugene Robinson causing that huge distraction, to the second time, 28-3. I'd probably put more of an emphasis on the 28-3 and what it was like to be in the game and on the sidelines that day, as that leads slowly and then quickly start to slip away. It's been written so much from the Patriot point of view, but to be on the other end of the greatest, I don't want, but the greatest wasting of the the 25-point lead in a huge game with only 18 minutes to go. What did that feel like? Was the desperation, anxiety? Actually, that might not be a bad book. Who knows?
There you go. I'm not asking for a forward here in it if you end up doing this book, Gary, but some kind of little shout out to the podcast.
All
That'd
right.
be cool.
All right. We'll see.
I love it. Well, speaking of the Super Bowl and memories, and this involves Kyle Shanahan because he was the offensive coordinator of that Falcons Super Bowl team. When you go back and you're thinking about this game and what ultimately happened here, Kyle Shanahan, another double-digit Super Bowl lead that does not result in a Niners title. How much of that is just chalked up to just bad luck and circumstantial? And how much of it is just, there's something about the way he calls games. There's something about the Kyle Shanahan offense that makes it more likely that something like this can happen. Where do you fall on that days removed from the Super Bowl now?
Well, this 10-point deficit that they squandered was different than the others because this was in the second quarter. The other ones were, the one to the Rams in the NFC Championship game was in the fourth quarter, the 28-3, obviously. They had a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. They had a 10-point lead against the Niners the first time they played them in the Super Bowl 4 years ago. So this was a lot earlier, but I think they should have had a much bigger lead at the half than 10-3. The McCaffrey fumble was a killer on the first series, and although Pacheco evened it out with his fumble, I really felt that McCaffrey's fumble cost the 49ers an opportunity to make an early statement in the game. Kansas City's defense didn't come close to stopping them on that first drive until they forced a fumble by ripping the ball out of McCaffrey's hands. And it was so unusual because he's great with ball control. He doesn't give it up very often. But I think you can blame Shanahan is not pounding McCaffrey enough in the second half. I think Elijah Mitchell is an excellent backup running back. At times, it seemed interchangeable during the course of the season when Mitchell was healthy. Whether it was he or McCaffrey in the game, it just seemed that their running game couldn't be stopped. I know he's been really subjected to a lot of second guessing on taking the ball to start overtime. And, I really hadn't thought it through that much until that happened because it's the first time since they changed the rules, I believe, that there's been overtime playoff game. When you get right down to it, Chase, you want to kick off in overtime for a couple of reasons. One, when you get the ball, you're guaranteed to getting the ball, and so you know what you need to do. And you see in college overtime, whoever wins the toss always kicks off. It's much different. They start the 25-yard line, but you want to know, do you need a field goal to win the game? Do you need a touchdown to tie the game? Do you need a touchdown to win the game? Do you want to think about going for a 2-point conversion? So I think it's much better to have the ball second, despite Shanahan thinking, well, if they matched each other on the first on each team's first possession, then the third possession you can potentially win the game. I think that was thinking too far ahead. The second reason I think you have to kick it off is when you get the ball, if you're trailing, you're now in 4-down territory, no matter where you are on the field. So the rules are different. When you got the ball the first time, San Francisco was ready to kick until that holding call on third down, and then a field goal would have beaten them. Well, when Kansas City had the ball down 3 points, they had to go for it on fourth down.
Yeah.
And even when I think they were like around the 35, 40-yard line their own, when they went for it on fourth down, they might not have done that if that was their first possession, or if San Francisco hadn't scored on their first possession. So I think giving Mahomes 4 downs all the way down the field is a tremendous advantage for Kansas City. Now, you never want to get to fourth down, but you know that if you do, and you have third and long, you can pick up half the yardage and then go for it on fourth down. So I think you'll see teams going forward now, anytime that situation comes up, and if they win the toss, they'll always kick off.
Well, I think too, what stood out to me that I said to my wife as there, I was like, I'm surprised he's not going for it on 4th and 3 at the 10,
Yeah,
where you just
yeah.
know you have Mahomes going in 4 down territory in this situation. And I just was surprised that Kyle was bold earlier in the game and earlier on that drive. And then when you're so close to not do a 4th and 3, because it's just like you're still gonna have to make Mahomes go 90 yards
Yeah,
if he's
I
going.
always say this, in defense
Yeah.
of him in that situation,
Mhm.
the, um, the Chiefs had moved it down the field on their last possession of
Yeah.
regulation to get the tying field goal, and, I think that the Niners defense was gassed a little bit at that point, which
Mhm.
may have contributed to why he took the ball to start overtime. He
Yeah.
didn't want to put his defense right back on the field. Um, Other than that, I agree with you that you're facing Mahomes and you don't want to put him in a position that if he gets a touchdown, the game's over. But maybe in the big picture, he looked at it like the Niners defense had done a really good job for
Yeah.
most of the game stopping him until that last drive. And even then, they kept him out of the end zone
Mhm.
at the end of regulation, what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of things that went into it. You can say, well, he had to make an evaluation in real time. But these are situations that should be thought through. So you're not making that decision under pressure. And I was really surprised to find out that Kyle said that, he discussed it with assistant coaches. When regulation was over, he had the assistant coaches go to the different position groups, were spoken to by the position coaches and explained about the overtime rules. You can't leave it to a situation then
Yeah.
when all hell is breaking loose on the sidelines and you're about to play overtime in the Super Bowl. These are things that had to be drilled into the players' heads. Not that
Mhm.
it would have changed the players' approach to anything, but you want them knowing what the rules are
Yeah.
when it's the first time it's ever come up. And you have a guy like Kyle Juszczyk, a Harvard guy who's a really smart guy, admitting he didn't know what the rules were until he looked on the scoreboard.
Yeah.
He was informing the fans what the rules were.
Did you already know about this, or were you watching the clock tick down? Like, what are y'all doing? What's happening here? Which one was
Oh,
it
at
for
the
you?
end of it would have been the end of the first quarter, and,
Mhm.
I knew it would go to the second quarter,
Okay.
that they had to get a full possession out of it.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if that was emphasized by the announcers. I'm gonna have to go back and watch and see what Nancy.
It was kind of like one of those, if y'all didn't know, it was later on because I think Romo realized that, hey, time's running out, and I'm sure there are a lot of people at home, if the casual fans who don't know that the clock, it doesn't matter if it runs out, that we should say something here. But I think even a lot of smart sports people were like, wait, what? Is that how this works? Because it wasn't being treated as this is quarter number one on the broadcast for the
Yeah, no,
duration.
you are right about that.
Mhm.
It seemed there was more of a sense of urgency about the clock.
Yeah.
But
Which brings the
and
point, why do they need a clock if there's gonna be if every team
well,
gets
I'll tell
possession,
you
you know what I
why.
mean?
I'll tell you why I think in a second.
Okay.
Um, when Bill Vinovich, the referee, and I think it was Mahomes and Fred Warner who came out for the
Mhm,
talk. I don't know if it was like the 6 guys on each team, like they did at the beginning of the game. But if you remember, he said, "This is now playing like a new game. We're starting a new game."
mhm,
So in that case, it makes you think that, okay, the clock only really matters because they're gonna flip the field at the end
mhm,
of the first quarter, and then if it happens to go a full 2 quarters, then the clock becomes relevant as it's winding down at the end of the second quarter, because then the third quarter will start like a normal third quarter starts. It's not gonna be a carryover
mhm,
from the second quarter. So that's where I think the clock would come into effect.
hmm,
Um, if it wasn't being played in a dome where which way you're going really doesn't matter, and you're playing outside where wind might have been a factor,
mhm,
then the clock would matter because maybe you're trying to flip the field to get the advantage of going with the wind uh, in the second quarter. So that's why they play with the clock. But I think you're right. It wasn't hammered home on the broadcast that, okay, don't worry about the clock
mhm,
because we're going to the second quarter here. And even when I was watching the interviews, I think it was on NFL Network after the game, that when they had either Andy or Patrick on,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the guys was saying, were you getting nervous because the clock was running down? That led me to believe that the announcer, whoever it was, wasn't aware of the rules. I mean, do you remember a few years ago? I mean, it was more than a few, it was probably 10 years ago, that the Eagles got into an overtime game
Mm-hmm.
and McNabb admitted that he wasn't
Yes.
sure of the rules. I don't
Mhm.
remember what the confusion was, if he thought the game went a full 15 minutes.
I think that's what it was. I think because it was a regular season game against Washington, right? If I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. But I do remember, yeah, he didn't know what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, he thought overtime maybe went a full 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't remember exactly, but he did admit he didn't know the rules, whatever
Yeah.
he didn't understand. And I would venture to guess that all the Chiefs knew the rules, because Mahomes even said that the coaches had been drilling it into him since the beginning of the playoffs, because this rule wasn't just for the Super Bowl, it was for any playoff game. So Andy made sure the players were aware of it. Shanahan didn't. And that's really surprising to me, because he appears to be a coach that covers every base rather, with his players, every potential scenario, like Belichick, and the best coach of game management ever was Parcells, and that his players would have known what the rules were. So I'm really surprised that the Niners players are saying they were not aware of it, and even more surprised that Shanahan, if he didn't make a big point of it going into the playoffs, that with the 2 weeks to prepare for the Super Bowl, that he didn't make sure his players knew what the rules were.
When you look at next year here, Gary, the Cowboys obviously going all in. Mike Zimmer's back as DC. You tweeted about, like, it's kind of wild, and it really is. Two of the iconic brands in the NFL, in Dallas and San Francisco, have not won a Super Bowl in 1994 and 1995 between the two. And yet they've had a lot of success over the last few years. Like, obviously, Kyle Shanahan's built a juggernaut. Dak Prescott, top 5, top 7 quarterbacks, somewhere in that grouping. The offenses has been fantastic year over year. You obviously have a superstar edge guy in Micah Parsons. They've had the talent. They've been right there. You win the division this year, and you thought things might be a little bit different. If you're Dallas, with Philadelphia falling off a little bit. But when you look at those two, I see, when I'm thinking about the hierarchy of the NFC next year, I think it's still a wait and see with Philadelphia. I think it's San Francisco, who came out, I believe, as the betting favorite to win the Super Bowl going into next year. But when you think about Mike McCarthy in this year and Kyle Shanahan coming off this Super Bowl loss, which of the two do you think is under more eyeballs, more of a hot seat type situation between the two?
Well, I think that you'd have to say it's McCarthy. At least, Shanahan's at least getting the Niners to the Super Bowl, and he needs to get over the hump, obviously. And he's a young guy, and I would venture to guess that at some point he's going to win a Super Bowl with the Niners. When I tweeted that the other day, the Niners haven't won a Super Bowl since '94, the Cowboys since '95, but at least the 49ers have been to 3 of them since then. The Cowboys, this is mind-boggling. And the Niners have been to a bunch of NFC Championship games that they've lost. So at least they're right on the edge a bunch of times. The Cowboys haven't even been to an NFC Championship game since the last one they were at. Since the last Super Bowl they got to in '95. They haven't made it past the divisional round of the playoffs in what is now almost 30 years. How incredible is that when you think about that the Cowboys are on national TV the maximum number of times every year. They're talked about as a Super Bowl contender every year, and they haven't even been to a conference championship game. Jacksonville has been to a couple. Carolina has been to 2 Super Bowls, and these teams didn't come into the league until '95. So I think it was '95, not '96 that came in at '95. So, as far as Shanahan now has got a label of can't winning the big one and mismanaging games, which, I can't say it's unfair because of what his history has been, going back to 28-3, like we talked about earlier. And, he wasn't the head coach of that team, but he was the offensive coordinator, and he was calling pass plays when he should have been eating up the clock with running plays. So it goes as much on his resume as it does on Dan Quinn's. As far as McCarthy is concerned, Chase, I'm really surprised that Jerry Jones kept him. I mean,
Hmm.
what's the point other than he likes him? McCarthy's happy to have that job, and he's not going to give him pushback with Jerry's involvement.
Yeah.
I really thought, and I thought this since the end of October, that Bill Belichick would be the Cowboys coach in 2024, because I knew the Cowboys were going to lose in the first or second round, because they always do. And it seemed like it was very clear that Belichick was not going to make it past this season in New England.
Yeah.
He's a win-now coach. He needs 15 more to pass Shula. He desperately wants to do that. And just as important to him is winning a Super Bowl without Brady, because Brady won one without him. And now everybody says, oh, that just proves that it was all Brady in New England and not Belichick. That's just not fair. I mean, what they did apart from each other has nothing to do with what they did together. And I thought it was mostly Belichick early in that dynasty, and certainly it was Brady, the second half of that dynasty. But Jerry Jones is in his early 80s, and I hope he lives another 25 years. But when you get to that point in your life, and I remember Leon Hess when he was with the Jets. Oh, in the Jets, he told the players, "I'm 80 years old, and I want to win now, or I want results now." Well, he's 81 or 82, and he has a team that is built to win now. Why wouldn't he want a win now coach in Belichick? How often do you get a chance to hire the best coach in NFL history? And it kind of goes back to when he hired Parcells in 2003, that, Bill, at that point, a lot of people considered him the best coach ever, him and Lombardi. And now Belichick has passed everybody because he's won 6 Super Bowls. But, Jerry brought in Parcells, a very strong personality, to turn things around. He was trying to get the funding for a new stadium in Arlington, and they had 3, 5, and 11 seasons in a row. And who better to bring it in than the greatest fix-it guy in NFL history, who was Parcells? And mission accomplished, because he made the Cowboys relevant again, even though he couldn't get them to the Super Bowl. Now you fast forward to 2024, and you have a team that has to win now with the roster the way it's presently constructed.
Yeah.
McCarthy got to 1 Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, one of the great quarterbacks in NFL history. So why would he want to run it back with McCarthy, then claim we're all in? I mean, is all in bringing back Mike Zimmer? I don't think so. And you have 2 head coaches now, just like you had McCarthy and Quinn. Quinn, was the coach for the greatest collapse in Super Bowl history when he was with Atlanta. Zimmer never got to a Super Bowl with Minnesota. I know he's well liked in Dallas from his time there. Who knows? Maybe if Belichick went there, he would have hired him as his defensive coordinator. But bringing McCarthy back to me makes no sense.
I think with Belichick, the cool thing would have been New York, the final full circle thing. I mean, you talk about a team ready to win now. It's the Jets. Like the Jets with Aaron Rodgers.
Never.
It would never happen.
I thought you were talking about the Giants.
No, the Giants. I just don't feel like Daniel Jones is a Belichick guy. I don't think that would be a situation he would want to walk into. I just feel like the Jets, for a 2-year window to break Shula's record, you know what you have in Aaron Rodgers and company. The defense is still solid. Good offensive line when they're healthy. Like you can kind of, I mean, the history there obviously with the Jets decades ago, but to stick it to the Patriots a little bit on the way out, I don't know. I was kind of quietly pulling for the Jets, and I also, me being a Falcons guy, I just never bought into the Falcons fit ever working, just because it would require too much reorganizational shuffling that I just don't think was ever on the table. And I was surprised that was the favorite for him, because I'm like, I don't see that working. I didn't see that as a match.
Well, they were the only favorite for him because they were the only ones that interviewed him.
Yeah.
Nobody else stepped up. I think the whole thing about Belichick wherever he went, haven't want to redo the front office. I think that was overrated a little bit. I think that he just wanted a coach.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely believe that Rich McKay was probably not in favor of it, even though after they hired Raheem Morris, Arthur Blank reassigned Rich McKay back to the business side of it, and then hiring a lot of Blank's, non-football affairs. McKay was on the business. I didn't even realize that he was back on the football side until this whole search came up. But he, for the best of my recollection, when Thomas Dimitroff was there, I think that McKay kind of stayed out of the football decision making. As
Well, I think
far
it's
as
always been a collaborative, and there's a reason that they use the word collaborative a lot in that introductory press conference with Terry Fontenot and
Mhm.
Raheem Morris. Is collaboration, I think, is just a very strong thing that blank in this front office, because there's a lot of moving parts with whatever it's called, the acronym MBSE or whatever it's called. There's just a lot of moving parts and new faces that they introduced in these programs. And Rich McKay was actually there for that
what was the
introductory,
thing? A lot of moving parts with what?
with the organizational structure, where there's just, you have to, it's never been clear the last couple of years who's the final decision maker, right?
Oh,
Like, it's just one of those, it depends on who you ask is running the show in Atlanta. It just feels like no one's ever gotten a straight answer, because I mean, Terry Fontenot wasn't in that exit press conference with the firing of Arthur Smith. It was Rich McKay and Arthur Blank, and then
mm,
Terry Fontenot's back announcing Raheem Morris, and he said, so it just depends on the month here, Gary,
yeah,
for Atlanta in terms of how things are running.
yeah. As far as and that's interesting. As far as the Jets are concerned, I think there's still a lot of hatred in Belichick's
Yeah.
heart for the Jets. Um, Now, I want to make it clear, when he left the Jets, it was
Hmm.
before Woody Johnson was named the owner. It was still like 1 or 2 weeks before Johnson. At
Hmm.
that point, it was Woody Johnson versus Charles Dolan. I don't think that Belichick wanted to work for either one of them,
Hmm.
and had probably done his research on both of them. And he wanted to go to New England and work for Kraft, and it was
Yeah.
obviously a great career move.
I think it worked out a little bit, Gary.
Yeah, it did. But as far as him coming back now and working for Woody Johnson, I just don't see that.
Yeah. So what, we'll end here. Where do you think we
Yeah.
see Belichick next year? Do you think
Mhm.
he gets another job, and where do you think it is? Where's your prediction on February
Well, okay.
14th?
Yeah, I definitely think, let's put it this way. He definitely wants to coach
Hmm.
next year. I think the only concern about him not coaching is that, obviously not counting the Patriots, there were 7 openings
Yeah.
this year, and he only, if you want to say, came close at a job. It was only Atlanta.
Yeah.
Washington apparently showed some late interest, but it never got to the point that he was interviewed. So if the 7 teams that were looking for head coaches this year didn't show any interest in him, what's going to change next year?
Yeah.
Now, maybe he's got a little repairing of his image to do, and to get the word out there that, no, I don't want to come in and basically blow up the front office and bring all my people in. I just want to come in and coach.
Yeah.
He's
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 going through
got
the podcast hits where he's going to have to talk about, like,
yeah.
that's not what I want to do anymore at this point in my career. I just want to, yeah.
So where could it be? I'll go back and say it can still be Dallas.
Yeah.
Nothing will have changed. They're going to Cowboys will win the division this year. They'll lose in the wild card or the divisional round. McCarthy, who's in the last year of his contract, will get fired, and Jerry will have to decide: do I want to go with Belichick, or do I want to start over, bring a young guy in, bring another failed head coach somewhere? And you can't call Belichick a failed head coach. You
Hmm.
can't call him a recycled head coach. The guy wins 6 Super Bowls. The other one to keep a good look on are the Giants.
Hmm.
He's got love in his heart for the Giants, even though they beat him twice in the Super Bowl. And although it was Wellington Mara that he had all those fond feelings for, John Mara, I think, is a terrific owner, despite what fans might think. He wants to win, and he's so passionate about winning. But he sometimes just made the wrong decision on his general manager and his coach. I think he got the general manager right this time. We'll find out about Dable. I mean, a
Hmm.
year ago, he was coach of the year. Then he has a really bad season, and a lot of his coaches left, and you hear that he's tough to work for. Well, if he's had another, 5 and whatever their record was, I lose 5-12, 6
I
and
think it was
11.
5-12. Yeah.
Yeah. The 17-game season has completely thrown me off on schedule.
I know they need to get up to 18. We need the 18. We know it's coming. Just add the 18 so it's easy to remember. Let's just
I
get to
hope
that.
not, because I don't think that's good for the players. But
No.
if the Giants have a really bad season and there's a lot of turmoil, then Dable will be fired, and there's going to be a lot of pressure, I think, and a lot of momentum for the Giants to bring in Belichick. And I would not be, and I think he'd rather come here than Dallas.
Huh.
Here, I mean, in New York, just because of how he feels about the Giant organization. Although going to Dallas might give him a better opportunity to win and to win a Super Bowl. But we got to see what the Giants do in the draft, what their personnel looks like. But I do think he'll have opportunities next year, and he should have had them this year. I mean, if an owner wants to win, how can you not at least show interest in Belichick? It doesn't make
Well, I
any
think
sense.
what we learned with Vrabel not getting another job, with Belichick being out and Pete Carroll being out, it was almost like a subliminal message of like the era of the coach being the leader in of the football organizational structure. I think might be behind just might be a long gone era, because a bygone era where everyone wants collaboration. I think if we took notes, Gary, on what every new coaching hire said the most and described it, collaboration between the
Yeah,
GM, the
yeah,
coach, and everything else. I think a lot of these owners, and that's just the new thing, is they want the everybody to work hand in hand. They don't want a power struggle. They don't want the coach to be the final decision maker on everything. And I think you overlook the great coaches in Vrabel and Belichick, where they should. There's a reason that they had that final decision making capability for years and years, and won a lot of football games that way, won Super Bowls. And I think you sometimes overthink it by this collaboration front, and it's like Belichick should be coaching somewhere. It's silly.
absolutely. I think like in Seattle,
Mm,
it was a collaboration between Pete Carroll and John Schneider. I don't know what the structure was in Tennessee, especially with Rand Carthon being the new GM.
mm,
Uh, Maybe the power that Vrabel had in the past had started to dissipate. The other thing is, I know people are making Vrabel out to be like the next great head coach, or maybe that he is a great head coach. I
mm,
didn't really see it in Tennessee.
hmm.
Um, I was not shocked that he didn't get another job right away. I think he will get another job in the next year or so, but it's not like, oh, Mike Vrabel's available, we got to go hire him. I didn't feel that way about him. His teams in Tennessee were more like grinded out teams, real throwback teams. Um, they weren't winning the way um, teams are winning now by throwing the ball. And his last couple of seasons there were not great. So I do think he's a good coach and he'll get another shot at it. But I think he's got to modernize his approach to offense somewhat.
I also just think he'd be really good at college. I think he'd be a good recruiter. I
Yeah,
think he would be
yeah.
good leading a Power 2 program, whether that's in the Big Ten or SEC. I think Vrabel would do really, really well in the college game. Gary, what can the good folks check out from you all across the internet? How they support and buy your book, Once a Giant, and everything else? What how do we sell some more books as we wrap up here tonight, Gary?
Yeah, no, that would be great. My book, Once a Giant, came out in September. It's doing really, really well, which I appreciate. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online. Basically, there's like 10,000 places online you can get
Mm-hmm.
it. And fortunately, there's still some bookstores open around the country, Barnes and Noble, and a lot of independent bookstores. I love independent bookstores
Yep.
and supporting them. I've done a bunch of book signings there, and we sold a bunch of books that way. Yeah, so you can find it anywhere. And like I said at the beginning, Chase, you don't have to be a Giant fan, really.
Yep.
If you like that era and are interested in how players from that era, before the concussion protocols came into effect, before they're protected by 5 years of health insurance, after they retired. Back then it was 12 to 18 months. They really dealt with different parameters and protocols back then that has made life, as they're now in their late 50s to early 60s or late 60s, it's made life, full of challenges, both from a mental health aspect and, financially and physically. And there's really some really amazing stories in this book.
Go buy it today. Once a Giant. Go buy Brady versus Manning. Go buy The Catch. There's all kinds of great books. But go support Gary, one of the best NFL writers each and every day. Gary, this was a pleasure as always. We'll have to do this again soon.
Anytime, Chase. I always like talking to you.